Okay, we're going to continue with the program. I think there's still some people to come, but we're going to continue. Our next speaker is about conflict transformation, what's possible. As the anti-racism community led at the City of Calgary and a 2019 Rotary Peace Fellow, Lorelei will share her experience as a Métis cultural mediator working to transform conflicts locally and globally. Lorelei will also share practical strategies for taking anti-racism action, increasing equity, diversity, and inclusion, and belonging, and the critical importance of Indigenous relations. Whether it is at home or is in the workplace, the shared path forward requires all of us. Let's explore what's possible when we all take action individually and collectively. A few words about Loralie Higgins. She is a Métis Canadian cultural mediator, Rotary Peace Fellow, Rotary Exchange student, Rotary Positive Peace Activator, and an Indigenous Relations Strategist. She is also Mrs. Canada Globe 2021. I just have to diverse a little bit. I looked at her and thought, how could you achieve all of this? She looks so amazing. Lorelei leads conflict transformation projects globally with a focus on Indigenous human rights. Lorelei is presently employed with the City of Calgary as an Indigenous Relations Strategist. Her mandate is to develop the city's Indigenous Relations portfolio in light of the 2016 Truth and Reconciliation Report. This includes the development of a Calgary Indigenous Relations Office. Also, Lorelei is married with 2 children and is able to do all this. Lorelei obtained a Bachelor of Arts from the University of Alberta, majoring in political science and international relations. She has an MBA from Royal Roads University, majoring in executive management and leadership. Lorelei also obtained a certificate from Chulalongkorn University, Bangkok, Thailand, as a Rotary Peace Scholar. Lorelei served with the Department of Foreign Affairs and International Trade in Bolivia, and subsequently worked as a team leader and program officer for Ghost River Discovery, the NGO for which she interned, and oversaw administration of programs around the world. She speaks Spanish and French fluently. She has extensive community service and volunteerism, including participation in national leadership programs, mostly recently with the Governor General's Canadian Leadership Conference. This has strengthened her skills as an effective leader and communicator. Please welcome Loralie Higgins.
Okie. Good job. Dani Tata. Ambo a stitch. Some of you practice this with me. Tanche. Good job. And hello. Hi, everybody. So I'm Lorelei. What a wonderful introduction. I think you know everything about me. We'll get an update. I'm Mrs. Canada 2023. I'm separated and dating. So there's a few updates to my bio, just so you know. But yes, I still have 2 children. So it's lovely to be here. I'm just going to see. And so we're here to talk about some conflict transformation and what's possible. And so if you're thinking, you know, conflict's a bad thing, I'm going to talk about how it's a good thing and how we can actually walk through it. I'm going to tell you a little bit about what a Rotary Peace Fellow is actually up to, and also just get a little bit into my work and some of the things that my Rotary story. So has everybody taken a minute to recognize where we are today? To say hello to Mother Nature and the land? Has anybody been outside today? Yeah. So yeah, it's wet. So you've all done an ancestral lands acknowledgement just by acknowledging where you are in time and space. How lovely is it to be here in the heartland of the Blackfoot? Thank you for hosting us. So when I think about the land, I live in Calgary right now. This is a special place that I go to. This is a sun wheel made by the late Andy Blackwater. And when I need to ground myself or when I'm thinking about things, my land acknowledgement is being on the land. It's actually being there. As a Métis person, some of you might be wondering what my red sash is. Our cart tracks run across Canada. We've been here since the 1800s. And a lot of you are like, who are the Métis? We're the children of the fur traders. And so we have these cart tracks that run across the nation, and we ran a lot of the fur trading posts. But when I think about what being on the land means to me, I think about those veins of my ancestors and actually being there and the heartbeat that we got to be part of and continue to be part of being that connectivity. And so that's a big part of where Rotary fits in. So it's Coronation Day. Where's everybody else's crown? I was told to bring my crown. It feels a little bit odd to be the only one celebrating Coronation Day. So part of my Rotary story is this crown. So thank you to all of you in this room. This is also your crown. You have created this. The question from Barry was, what do Rotary Peace Fellows do? We get a crown. Clearly, that is what we do. So yes, I'm your Mrs. Canada 2023. It is the Globe pageant system. A lot of people ask me, what did it feel like to get that crown? So there's my crowning moment in the blue dress. That is actually in November 2020. Why is Lorelei still wearing a crown, you might wonder? Why is she claiming to be Mrs. Canada 2023? And so because of the pandemic, I got to be one of the longest serving Mrs. Canadas. It's lovely. The pandemic was quite good for me in some ways. But also, eventually my reign came to an end. So last June, that's my goodbye walk in my gold dress there. I'm saying thank you so much. It's been wonderful being your Mrs. Canada. And I said goodbye. Well, as fate would have it, I placed in the top 10 in the world. And so I had the opportunity to get a new title. And so the pageant said to me, you get a whole continent. Congratulations. And I said, great. I can't wait to be Mrs. Turtle Island. And they said, oh, we don't have that title. And I said, well, what do you have? Well, you could be Mrs. North America. You could be Mrs. North Continent. And I said, well, that's kind of colonial. Could we like maybe just advance a little bit and could I be Mrs. Turtle Island? And they said, we're not ready for that. And I said, okay, well, our competition was meant to be held in Hong Kong. I'm supposed to actually be there right now. But because of the continued impacts of the pandemic, we're going back to Palm Springs in June. And so I said, well, if I'm going to be on this international pageant stage, I think I'd still want to represent Canada. And they said, well, you can't do that because you have a new title, a new crown, a new continent. And I said, well, can you make it happen? So what they came up with was two-time national champion Mrs. Canada. So now I'm Mrs. Canada again. So we made it happen. So a lot of people ask me, Lorelei, how did you become Mrs. Canada and when did you get into beauty pageants? So there's a little clip I'm going to show you in a second where I did have a little brief interlude to get money for school, which Rotarians also supported. But truly, I'm a peace builder. And we were having a conversation during the early days of the pandemic about positive peace and how we talk to different groups about it. And who doesn't actually talk about world peace? And somebody said, well, in beauty pageants, they're always talking about world peace. Has anybody seen Miss Congeniality? Right. So imagine a boardroom table, these conversations, and somebody says, we should go to a pageant and just talk about world peace for real. And then somebody said, well, Lorelei could do it. I've seen this article way back from when, and she could do it. And so it was a bit of a dare. And I said, okay, yeah, I'll do it. I'll go talk about world peace for real. Nobody expected me to actually win. And so there's a little bit of a story there. But we were told to make a speech. And somebody said to me, we're going to have this great leadership talk. So we're all gathered around. And one of the men who's involved with the pageant comes along and he says, okay, so if any of you win, I don't want any of you going up there to talk about cancer or world peace or anything, because none of you are going to cure cancer. None of you are going to do world peace. And I was like, excuse me, that is the whole reason I came here. And so when I went up to make my speech in the personality competition, I came out on the stage speaking my language. And I started talking about how it was not long ago that it was illegal to wear the sash in Canada and to speak my language. And I kind of just put the microphone down and I said, you know what? We're not going to talk about any of that. We're going to talk about the fact that some man told me that I can't do world peace. And so I'll show you the picture in a second of what I put on the screen. And then I launched into the 8 pillars of positive peace. And never underestimate the power of a slow clap, because after I finished my speech, the room was very quiet, much like this one. But then one very brave person started going like this. And then everybody started clapping. Then everybody gave me a standing ovation. And I thought, well, I'm either disqualified from the pageant or I've won. Let's find out. So I walked up to the man, Spiro, and he was sitting there with his arms crossed. And I said, Spiro, what did you think about my speech? And he slowly got a smile and he goes, bravo, that was brilliant. And so the legend lives on in the pageant about the girl who actually talked about world peace for real and won. So I want to introduce you to my grandmother, Delia. How many of you have actually met her in some of my presentations? Yeah, a couple of you. A couple of you are big fans. You follow me around my circuit. Thank you for always coming out. So my grandmother, Delia, is one of the first generations in my family to navigate a really complex history. And we've heard a lot about what's happened to Canada's Indigenous peoples and our histories. In my family, we've walked that fine line of being both European and Indigenous. And what that means is in my grandmother's lifetime, they were creating a new language, figuring out what it meant to be both English, Cree, and Ojibwe, but also became illegal to speak our language and to use our cultural customs. And so my grandmother is always with me, because when I think about the things that I get to do, including wearing this sash and speaking my language, she lived in a complete generation of fear. And so you see that in my family. My dad, to this day, if the doorbell rings, he jumps out of his skin, because he grew up in Winnipeg, and it was the times of the 60s scoop, which went from the late 60s to the late 80s. And at any point, the Indian agent could come to the door and take your children away under the initiative called AIM, so Adopt an Indian Métis Child. And just in the name of that, they could come to the door and say, we're going to give your children to a white family and give them a better home. And so when I think about the things that my family's been through and the generational impacts to that, and when I see my dad jump out of his skin when the doorbell rings, I always think, wow, what was it like? And just, you know, I've had to be the generation to walk through that bravely. And so that's part of that conflict transformation. And what I've had to do is face that head on, is to not shy away from it, but to say, okay, so that happened. Am I going to continue to live in fear of who I am, or are we going to walk through this? So this is little Lorelei. Does this seem like me? Like literally, this is how I came out of the womb. Hello, I'm here. How many of you have these moments where you wake up or you just in your day, you're like, life is good? Anybody? Anybody having a moment like that today? Yes. It is so good to be in community. Thank goodness that I'm at Rotary. 1.4 million people, I always like to say a billion, around the world who wake up like this. You know, we all have hard times, but basically I was very lucky, because way back in 1998, Rotary met me and I met Rotary. So was anybody part of this youth exchange weekend way back in 1998? You might be in that picture. So I like to call this the year of the growth or the great breakup. So I went away from a district that then came, and I came back to 2 districts. And so I was really lucky, because Spruce Grove sent me as an exchange student. And when we talk about Rotary taking risks and really taking those leaps of faith, I want to tell you honestly that Rotary took a huge leap of faith with me. I, believe it or not, used to be really shy, and I could not public speak for the life of me. And so I had one teacher, some of you heard this on the panel yesterday, and that teacher said to me, you know, Lorelei, I think that you would make a great exchange student. My husband's in Rotary, and you should definitely go to the interviews. And so I thought, well, what's Rotary? I'll go check it out. And when they asked me all the questions, I got really nervous. And And they said, well, if you get selected, where would you want to go? And I remember saying, you know what? I've never even been on an airplane. I was 17 years old. And I said, I don't really know what to say to you except what's the furthest I can go? And they said, Africa. And I said, that sounds lovely. Like, let's do that. And so as fate would have it, I was chosen, and I got to spend the year in South Africa. So that's what I call my peace building incubation. And that's really where I learned about conflict transformation. And we use a lot of fancy words now, like those. But truly, what I learned about being in Rotary is that it's connecting with each other, and it's about relationships. So here's my class of people. You can see that my blazer became quite full. I still bring it to presentations to this day. And we had such a fantastic year. Some of you got to see or hear my poem, A Year of Change. It was published. If you want to hear it, I can read it for you later. And there's lots of news clippings about my year. And I don't think now you can publish something in a newspaper with someone riding an elephant like that. But in context, my local newspaper was quite excited. And so here's some of my Rotary moments. So this year absolutely changed my life. And as I started to figure out what I wanted to do, I realized that I wanted to be with people. And I wanted to know what it was like to really impact in community. So we did everything from painting schools to saving baby lions. And that's my basketball team up there. I was benched in my senior year in Canada. I was told I was too short to play. And so I had a great shot, and I was devastated. Well, enter South Africa. I got to be the point guard, and we won nationals. I made sure my high school coach heard about that. But one little snippet that I like to share with people, can everybody see the girl in the maroon sweater there? Anybody know who that is? So Rotary has been a big part of creating Rebel Wilson. And many of you may or may not know who she is. You can Google her at some point. There's some really fun articles if you look up Mrs. Canada and Rebel Wilson. So I can tell you that the exchange student stories don't end. It's just now there's social media. So there is some footage of her stealing my crown and wearing it, and we get up to lots of adventures even today. But one thing I like to point out to people is Rotary definitely impacts people's dreams. And why I share this about Rebel is she's continued to be a good friend. But she always says to us, and she tells this story quite often, she had malaria and she started hallucinating. And we were on one of the RILA programs, and we'd been selected out of the group to go on this. And we were all hiking, and she's hallucinating, and she goes, I'm going to be a famous actress. And we're all like, yeah, I know you're not. And so we all laughed at her. But she is. She really is. She did it. And so we've all had to eat our words. And so that's what I always tell people. When you look at people and when they're achieving things in their life and following their dreams, quite often Rotary's behind it. And we don't always all get to be Rebel Wilson, but we do get to live our dreams. And that's what Rotary is fantastic at, is investing in people. So this is the clip I promised. I really didn't have money for school, and so when I came back from my exchange, I really wanted to go to university, and so I was really looking at what I could do, and I was in an acting class, and somebody said, well, you can do a calendar or you can do this pageant. And I said, well, what does each one pay? And they said, okay, if you do the calendar, it's $100, but if you do the pageant and you place in the top 10 in Canada, you get $5,000. Plus you get a new bathing suit every year for 5 years, and you get some makeup. I thought, okay, and my acting coach said to me, Lorelei, it's like acting. You just need to get on the stage and act. And I was like, okay. So Rotarians came together and helped me get my plane ticket over to Toronto. And one of the Rotarians was a photographer, and she did all my headshots for me. And so I placed in the top 10, and I got a degree. So thank you, Rotary. So my Rotary story continues. I got to finally be a Peace Fellow in 2019. And I love the question about what are Peace Fellows up to. So many of us are doing so many different things around the world. Some of us have gone on to be part of this Rotary Peace Activator program with the Institute for Economics and Peace. And so you'll see us out in the community talking about positive peace and helping people realize how everyday peace building is truly embedded in the things that we do every day. So that is my platform. When they asked me what my platform would be as a beauty pageant queen, I was like, everyday peace building. So I haven't had to create anything. I've just had a chance to amplify the good work that everybody's doing through this crown. And so this is sort of the way I look at everyday peace building and when I look at conflict. We need to be the buffalo. So this is a very famous painting by my good friend Curtis Cameron. He's out of Edmonton. He does incredible photography. And this is one of his real life photos. But when I think about conflict, it's one of those things that we like to avoid it, right? In fact, we've created a program for people who like to avoid conflict. We're going to talk about it in a second. But one of the images and the teachings that I have is around the buffalo. And so when buffalo are approaching a storm, they're one of the only animals that'll actually go through the eye of a storm. Most animals will walk all the way around it and it'll take days and some will perish. But the buffalo is the one animal that'll actually like put its head down and just get through it. And that's what we sometimes need to do with conflict, is we need to actually talk about it. We need to actually name it. We need to actually have really good conversations. So if you remember one thing from what I'm telling you today is be a buffalo. So this is a very fancy chart to help with the underpinnings, and we can make sure everybody gets a slide deck after. But when you look at conflict resolution, those are kind of the principles of like, let's just get this, what do we need to do to like figure this out? Conflict transformation is on the other side of it, and this is the work of John Paul Lederach. But he really talks about the idea of conflict is a pivotal point that we can actually use to transform where we're at. So we can choose to just walk around it, or we can actually walk through it and we can actually come out with a better product. So there's a lot of work around this and the words we choose to describe conflict. So when I think about conflict transformation, these are the tables that we're usually at. How many of you have been in a table like this actually working through things? Yes, this is with the Chicotlan Nation. So this is a recent contract I was on. This is us on the land, actually doing a plant walk. And one of the conflicts they were working through on the nation was actually like, where do we see ourselves going? Do we want a cultural center? And do we want to start to share our knowledge about plants? And some people had not talked to each other in like 10 years. And we got everybody out on the land and we started saying, what do you envision for the community? What do you imagine? What do you want the world to know about the Chicotlan Nation? And sometimes conflict transformation looks like this. How many of you have actually dealt through conflict through food? That's right. So as a Peace Fellow, one of the outputs I did was I did a blog, a 6-part series. I literally ate my way through my Rotary Peace Fellowship. And so I spent time with every person in my class learning about their food, and I talked about food as a source of community and a point of connection. And through this journey, we got to meet one of the most amazing conflict transformation people in the world, Irene Santiago. And she's been very involved in the Chulalongkorn program in Thailand. And she always said to us throughout, you can see her there in the blue vest, she always says, you know, conflict transformation is easy. It's about increasing connectors and decreasing dividers. So what can you do every single day to make a connection and to get rid of a divide? That's the simplest way that I've ever heard anybody talk about conflict, is just what if you woke up every single day and committed to being a connector? And I'm talking to a room of converts because I know that every single one of you do that. But what if we fortified our efforts, and what if we started to talk about it with people a little bit more? And sometimes conflict looks like this, right? So remember in the beauty pageant when I told you I put up a picture and I said, yeah, I actually do world peace? I put up that one with the armed militia. And I said, that's me working on the peace agreement in the Philippines. Do you have any more questions? So most of our conflict resolution does not take place in fancy boardrooms or anything else. It takes place in kitchen tables, in dirt roads, in community buildings. Do any of you have community buildings maybe similar to this or other places in the world where you've worked through incredible things and thought we didn't even need a PowerPoint? What we needed to do was to be human and sit together and learn, or maybe be in a cultural ceremony. And so as we start to think about this, I don't want you to think that it's all hugging and world peace. There's a lot of stuff that goes into this, and especially as a Rotary Peace Fellow, we're constantly looking for material to support what we're doing, and we're actually some of the ones writing it now. So some of the things I'm just going to leave with you to think about as we think about transforming conflict and underpinnings of it is, how many of you have heard about intersectionality? Yeah. So it's really important. If you don't know about it, Google it. But really, as we start to think about those intersections of how people show up in the world, a lot of it is like, who are you? What's happened to you? What's your family story? And so the point of also showing you my grandmother, Delia, is she faced a lot of intersection points. And those intersection points being Indigenous, female, Métis, all kinds of things, led to her life, and she made choices that she had to make to survive. That impacted my family, which then impacted me, and those are all the things that when I show up as me, I'm a lot of intersection points. And it's really important that we start to see people in that way and not just, you know, they're just that way, or maybe it's because of this. It's a really simplistic view, but if we start to see people as the complex things that have happened or the way that they've been born, then we get to see more of them. Oops. So the other thing I was asked to talk about was equity. I was asked to talk about a lot of things, so we're covering things quickly. But equality and equity, has anybody done equity, diversity, inclusion, belonging work? Yeah. And some people say to me, what are the differences? So we're going to get a little bit into Indigenous matters towards the last slides here. But when we start to think about this work, it's actually not all the same. And so the point of introducing this is to show you that there's intersection points and it comes together, but a lot of it is a little bit different. So one concrete example I'm going to give you is if you're working in Indigenous relations, things like memorandums of understanding don't belong in an equity, diversity, and inclusion unit. They belong in Indigenous matters because that is an agreement with a nation, government to government usually. And so those kind of functions help us to distinguish what is the difference.
We have about 5 minutes.
Perfect. We'll start to wrap up. Good job, Steve. Didn't even ask you. So yeah, these are some more slides just basically around that. And so, you know, we can have lots of conversations after this around that. But one of the biggest things that I wanted to share with everybody is anti-racism. So I created our Indigenous Relations Office and I switched over into our anti-racism team. And a lot of people ask me why, like you built this whole office. And that's one of my outputs as a Rotary Peace Fellow is I created the office. But when George Floyd died, I noticed this massive divide starting to happen. And the Indigenous community in Calgary was starting to say, you know, a lot of Indigenous people have died, but Suncor, for example, has never issued a statement about this Indigenous person who's died. However, this other person died and there's this massive statement. And so there was these like kind of oppression Olympics starting to happen in Calgary. And so I thought the best thing I can do is ground our Indigenous relations work and our anti-racism work sort of in our colonial history and what's happened with our original peoples. So that's what I've been really busy up to lately is thinking about our anti-racism work from the lens of our colonial history. So we will skip some of this. The last story I want to leave you with, and I promise I'll finish in 3 minutes, Steve. And this is a total transformation point, but does anybody know where this is? So this might help. Oh no. Okay, we're back on track. So this is to Kamloops or Kamloops. So this is the site of where we found our first children. I'm going to skip to the slide where you get to see where the day I got to be Justin Trudeau. I think that's a good place for us to end today. These are all just teaser slides where you get to say, Lorelei, what was all that about? This is North and South Dakota, by the way. Oh, South Africa. Oh, we're not going to see my Justin Trudeau slide. So we're going to end with that. But essentially, everybody says to me, what can you do with the crown? What is the true meaning of it? What are you doing as a Peace Fellow? Well, on the first day for the National Day for Truth and Reconciliation, I was asked to attend Kamloops and be there as a dignitary. And I didn't have a real role. I was there just kind of in my crown, and people were like, who are you? And what are you doing in that crown? And so I just made myself useful. I served tea and got blankets. And at one point, there's a hush in the crowd, and the chief got on the stage, and she said, we've just received official notice that Justin Trudeau cannot be here today. And so there was this kind of silence, thousands of people just thinking, ah. Oh. And so I'm standing there, just minding my own business, and the chief says, but it's okay. We have Mrs. Canada here today with us. And so I leave you with that. If you think, what is the power of a crown? One day you might get to be Justin Trudeau for a single day. I've since written to his office and said, you're welcome. But what I did learn that day is that leadership is about showing up. And in that single day, I didn't have a job, I didn't have anything, I was barely even recognized for being there, but I was there in the moment. And for 9 hours, I stood in the rain and took thousands of photos with lots of people, elders, dignitaries, everybody else, and they all said thank you. And I said, well, what did I do? And they said, you came to this site on this important day and you showed up. And I think that's the most important thing that we can think about in terms of how we show up in the world and how we even deal with conflict and how we start to do things. It's about showing up. It's about being present in the conversations and being with people. And so I don't know if I'll ever get to be Justin Trudeau again, but it was lovely. So if you ever need me to stand in and bring my crown and give people hugs and pictures, just let me know. But thank you so much, Marcy, and I look forward to chatting with all of you a little bit more as the conference continues.
So I'm supposed to give you this tobacco pouch. I hope you don't have too many of them.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. And a little gift. And we appreciate that you showed up today.
Thank you. It was hard.
Thank you.